Okay, I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Common Council for February 11th, 2020. Can we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next, we'll have the clerk read the special announcement and call the roll.
February 11, 2020. Please be advised this meeting is being taped for audio and video broadcast. The meeting will also be closed captioned. It is important that everyone speak clearly into the microphones and only one person speak at a time. Assisted listening devices are available. Mr. Burnett.
Present.
Ms. Johnson.
Present.
Mr. Sacchinelli. Ms. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Hoovelman.
Here.
Mr. Roberts.
Present.
Mr. Dumas. Ms. Young.
Here.
Mr. Coyotes. Mr. Theodorides.
Here.
Mr. Keegan.
Here.
Mr. Sirenides. Mr. Livingston.
Here.
Ms. Shanahan.
Here.
11 present. We have a quorum.
11 present, we have a quorum. The only item on the agenda is the presentation of the 2020-21 fiscal year operating budget. Mr. Dakowitz is here for that purpose. Unfortunately, our audio-visual system is not working, so you each have a handout, and if you'll follow along. And Mr. Dakowitz, do you want questions during, or do you want to wait till the end?
My preference would be at the end.
Okay, so if you have questions, we'll entertain a session at the end of the meeting.
Mr.
So,
Langell.
Mr. Dakowitz, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Does everyone have a handout of the presentation?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. The first page is a table of contents of what I'll be covering. We start with an introduction. We then go into the recommended operating budget. We discuss authorizations of capital projects and debt service, economics, challenges in establishing budget for the Norwalk Public Schools, the recommended operating budget by city department, other tax revenue and non-tax revenue, the tax levy and mill rate, and the conclusion. Next page, it's slide number 3. First, let me talk about the timetable. Angela Fogel, the budget director, and I decided to stretch out the timetable. We started earlier this year, in early October. And what we did was an analysis of prior year's budgets and actual expenditures by department, by line item. And we developed a projection of what we thought would be a reasonable budget. In consultation with the mayor, we developed what's called the pro forma, and that is part of the budget book that was sent out to every department. The departments had a certain amount of time to review. Some departments were given more time. For example, IT has to consult other departments in order to develop their IT projections, so we gave them more time. We then set up a schedule where the budget department and I met with each department head and staff. And we had, well, before that, at the end of the time period, each department submitted their requested budget. So we sent them the pro forma, they send us the requested. We then have discussions with each department, and we discussed the differences and what they wanted and needed. We had, I'm pleased to report, at least 90% of the departments were very straightforward, honest, candid. For example, we did estimates, projection, based on 3 years of budget and actual. And some departments would say, oh, that line item, that was 2 years ago and it was a one-time expenditure. We don't need it going forward. So they gave it back to us and we reduced it. They said, but what we do need, and you couldn't tell, is we have something coming forward. And so we had very good, honest dialogue, and I was very, very pleased with that process. One of the other changes we made was that we went to a monthly budgeting system. In the past, it was done annually. We feel by monthly, worst comes to worst, take your annual number and divide by 12. But we do know there's some seasonality. For example, the tax collector sends out bills and collects revenues at different times. We know that certain expenditures are made at certain times. So we're just trying to get a more accurate budget month by month so that in the coming year we could do actual versus budget on a monthly basis, and we can see if there are problems anywhere, if revenue is coming in slower than we anticipated, if expenditures are higher than we anticipated, and we could have a discussion that says, why is this happening? What can we do to help? And make sure that by the end of the year we come in on budget. After we went through those requests and the dialogue with the department heads, we came up with a recommendation, which we then discussed with the mayor, and jointly we have produced what's in front of you, which is the recommended fiscal year 2021 operating budget. Questions? Okay. The next page, slide 4. It's a little hard to see. We have printouts. Why don't you pass this around? It'll be easier for everyone to follow. Okay. This is a spreadsheet with the operating budgets for the last 6 years and for this coming fiscal year 2021. That's the 6 years that Mayor Rilling has been mayor, plus this projected 7th year. On the top block are the city expenditures. The top line of that top block is the traditional sum of all the budgets, of all the departments' budgets that we're recommending. So if you could see on the left-hand side, column 2014-15, that's our fiscal year 2015. The city expenditures, excluding the schools, was $160.6 million. It has gone up this year, projected, the recommended for fiscal year 2021 is 177.2. If you go to the extreme right, we calculated the change. Over the 6 years of growth, it was 10%, 10.4%. If you annualize it, we call that a compound annual growth rate, it would be 1.7%, which would mean if each year, starting with 160.6 million, if there was a 1.7% increase each and every year, we would end up with the 177.2. Please note that for 2 of the years, fiscal year 16 and fiscal year 18, the budget went down. It went from 160 down to 156, and then from 17 to 18, it went down from 161.2 to 159.1. So it went up, it went down, averaged 1.7, total 10.4%. Now, if you look on the bottom block, where it says Superintendent Stephen Adamowski tenure, if you look at the top line there, that's the public school expenditures. Fiscal year 15, it was $166.4 million. The recommended fiscal year 21 amount is $208.4 million. Going to the right to look at the change, that change over 6 years is 25.2%. On an annualized basis, compound annual growth rate, that would be 3.8%. Okay, more than double what the city expenditures were. In the middle, there's a bar that's highlighted in yellow. That's just the inflation rate, consumer price index. That just gives you a frame of reference for all of these changes. Any questions? Okay. Now let's go back up to the city expenditures. So we started with 160 going to 177.2. As we go down, we have other tax revenue and non-tax revenue. These items reduce the net cost that we have of our expenditures. Other tax revenues are things like back taxes and supplemental auto. Non-tax revenues are primarily grants from the state. So if you now take the subtotal after those deductions, in fiscal year 15 on the city side, the expenditures were $125.5 million, going up to $137.2. Looking at the growth rate, that would be a little bit less than before, 9.3%, 1.5% per year. But note that the first 3 years were all reductions. We went from 125.5 to 119.6 to 118.9 to 116.3. Some of this is a result of the recession and the lower value of the grant list, and the city accommodated by lowering their expenditures. Okay? Next we come to something called in-kind expenditures. There are expenditures on behalf of the public schools and the students that are just run through the city accounting system. These are numbers that are understood by everyone, and they're filed with the state every year. So going down from the city, we deduct city expenditures on behalf of the schools to try to get a pure number of what we're spending on the city side. So in-kind services, it's everything from Mario's law department, my department that does payables and payroll. There are some IT expenses, there's public works, police, fire. So those are the in-kind services. Then there's debt service. I borrow money for the entire city, including the Board of Ed. We have debt service payments to be made each year, principal plus interest. We allocate the bonds, we know what they're borrowed for, and the bonds that are designated for public school projects, we know what that debt service is, and we can identify them. So we deduct that from the city side, because that expense is running through our accounts. So we deduct in-kind services and the debt service as a subtotal, and they're in red because they're a deduction and subtraction. So just note that those in-kind services and debt service were $24.7 million in fiscal year 15, rising to $28.9 million in fiscal year 21. So somewhere between 25 and 30 million per year we're spending, but it was always on our side of the ledger. So that's where I get the next subtotal called city net expenditures for city only. $100.8 million in fiscal year 15, rising. It went down for 3 years, 95, 93.3, 90.9, and then it went up the last 3 years, ending with fiscal year 21 recommended 108.3. If you look at the growth rate, 7.5% over the 6 years, and a per year average, that compound annual growth rate, of 1.2%. If you look at that middle yellow bar of inflation, you'll see inflation was somewhere between 1% and 2% each year. And we were at 1.2% on the city side. So pretty reasonable. Now let's look at the school side. So we had their expenditures of 166.4 rising to 208. Now we have to add back the same numbers that had been on our side of the ledger. So we add back 10.3 for in-kind, 14.4 for debt service. I'm in fiscal year 15 column, the first column. So we now add back the 24.7. The 166.4 is now 191.2 million. So if you look at city expenditures, we spent 100.8 million on the city side and we spent 191.2 for the public school side. That 191.2 grew each year to the recommended fiscal year 2021, 237.3 million. Growth rate on the extreme right, a total of 24.1% for the 6 years, an average of 3.7% per year. Okay, it's almost triple, it's more than triple the 1.2% on the city side. Any questions so far? Okay, yes?
Is it common for other cities to take on the in-kind debt and services for the Board of Ed?
Well, this is,
Or is this unique
it's a
to Norwalk?
form that's filed with Connecticut. So obviously, municipalities are expending those funds on behalf of their schools. And I'm not sure, I would assume it's with the Board of Ed, Chisholm. Where does it get filed? In the state?
Yes, the DFS.
So the state gets these numbers, so I would assume every city and town, we're not doing anything unusual. It's just, from an accounting point of view, I'm trying to figure out how much are the citizens of Norwalk paying for city services versus paying for school services. Tom?
Yeah, thank you. This is great, by the way, this detail we haven't had before. When we asked this question, I think of Tom Hamilton last year, he told us, that the way they calculate the per student expenditure was very...
I didn't get to that one yet. You're
Okay.
reading ahead.
All right, then I'll wait. I mean, because...
No. Per
because-
student is the one thing I left off.
Right, because, these numbers are different than theirs, right?
Yes. And I'll get to why.
Well, I'll let you go ahead then. Okay.
Okay. Any questions on what I've covered so far? No. Okay, so let's go to Tom's point. But wait, there's more. The public schools get grants from the state, and they're spending that on our children. Okay? Now, I look at it, again, I'm taking the perspective of a citizen. How much do I pay for the students and how much do I pay for the city? So everything I mentioned is through the city. But some of my state taxes is going to pay for the students as well. Okay? So we have state grants. Okay? And the public schools get additional amounts. It's a pretty small line item, add state funding of BOE. And then there's the grand total in red. So right before that, that line above it is state grants. And it went from 15.9 million, and the projection is for next year, 26.1 million. So when I am looking at how much money have the public schools spent on the children, it's their budget, it's the in-kind that's showing up on my accounting system, and it's the money they get from the state. That's what they're really spending on the students. When we add that number, we get to 207.1 million in fiscal year 15, growing every year to 263.5 million in fiscal year 21. 6-year growth, 27.2%. Annual compound growth rate, 4.1%. Okay? Now, underneath, Tom, I have student enrollment, and I calculate the amount of expenditure, total expenditure per student. Now, I believe the schools calculate their expenditure per student based on a formula dictated by the state. I don't even know what that formula is. It seems like it would exclude the state grants, and it excludes in-kind. So, for comparative purposes, if you wanted to see how Norwalk's doing versus Stamford, or versus Westport, or New Haven, those are all calculated the same way. So for comparative purposes, that's fine. My purpose here was just to say, here's the total amount we're spending on our children, and if I take the enrollment figures, these are pulled off of the annual report that the schools have posted on their website, then I get a per pupil expenditure. It's not comparable to what they did by formula, but it says something to me. And this number is approximately 15% higher than the numbers the public schools quote. So when they say we're spending $18,000 per student, I say, no, we're spending $22,000. Total. Have to include it all. If I could get a comparable number from the other districts, I would have to know what their in-kind spending is, and I would have to know how much they get in state grants. And then you could do apples and apples. But don't try to compare this to Stanford's per student. It won't work. Okay, now, I would just point something out about the enrollment. So from 2014-15 to 2018-19, we're talking of 5 years, the enrollment was pretty constant, from 11.1, 11.3, 11.4, 11.4, 11.4. This current year, it is anticipated that the enrollment is 11,612. That's an increase of 227 from 11,385 to 11,612. And that's part of the reason why you granted them the $1 million for all the English language learners and the tremendous growth of students. They're projecting for next year 11,943. That's an increase of 331 students. That's 150% of this year, which was a tremendous influx. As I'll discuss later, I have almost no insight into how they calculate their numbers and where they get the sources, but I'd be very curious to see how they estimated that and on what basis. 225 students one year, 330 the next. It's 550 students in 2 years. That's a lot. So I just point that out. Any questions? Okay. Let's go to slide 5. Now on slide 5, I just extracted some data because it's so hard to tell with that previous spreadsheet with so many numbers on it. Okay? So traditionally, when I came in and I looked at the numbers, I said, okay, the public schools are getting a little bit more than 50% of what the city is spending. Okay? 198.5 versus 169 the current year, and 208.4 versus 177 next year's recommended. But when I use the total expenditures that I've calculated, the schools are getting 71%. We're getting 29. And that's eye-opening. And I think that's very important. I think it says, and again, I'm pretty new, I'm here less than a year, but my understanding was, before Dr. Adamowski was here, before the mayor was here, there was an underinvestment in the schools. And we needed to invest more. Dr. Adamowski was hired because he had a plan. He had done great things in other places. He said, this is what we need to invest. The council agreed and gave him the funding, and we are now the #1 urban school district in Connecticut. Great. But did anyone realize that we're now at 71%? That's a very disproportionate share, and part of the theme of tonight is we're responsible for all the city functions, and we have to make sure that all of them are funded. Okay? Let me move on to the next page. I know this is slide 6. We're supposed to talk operating budget, but this is capital projects. The reason is capital projects are long-term. It's to finance things that are going to have a long life, right? My comparison is to a house or to a car. With a house, we get a 30-year mortgage. With a car, we might have 3 or 5 years of payments. If we couldn't make 360 payments on a house or 60 payments on a car, we might not be able to afford the car and get the use of it. But with the finance of debt, we're able to say, I sound like a car salesman, we could put you in this car today and you just make 60 payments of this. But that's what we're doing. We're financing a long-lived asset. It could be a 50-year-old school. It could be a 40-year sewer system. It could be some computer system that's going to last 5 or 7 years. And you have to find a way to fit it into your annual expenses. So the link between all of our long-term commitments and capital projects is the debt service, which is the lower half of this schedule. So all of those commitments to capital projects, hundreds of millions of dollars, translate into annual commitments that we have to make. And it's just like the house or the car. If you don't make those payments on time, your credit rating goes down. So we have to make sure that the debt service payments, debt service is just the principal repayment and the interest portion combined for every year, that those debt service payments fit into our annual budget. So what I'd like to point out here, I sort of divided it, looking at the numbers, into the first 3 years, fiscal years 15 through 17, and then the last 4 years, fiscal years 18 to 21. In fiscal years 14 to 17, if you look on the extreme right, the city averaged 15 million of, this is authorized appropriations, approved appropriations, and the Board of Ed, 4.2. So out of $20 million a year, the city had 78.4%. The percentages are below. In the last 4 years, as the amount of capital appropriations has zoomed up to 75 million per year on average, the Board of Ed is 71.5%. And that's understandable. We're rebuilding a whole bunch of expensive schools. But again, we're spending 71% of our capital budget on schools. Okay? Now I want to go below because I said debt service is the link between the capital appropriations and the annual budget. When you look at the numbers for the amount of annual debt service, it didn't seem to change much. In fact, the city had 47.5% of the debt service payments in fiscal years 15 through 17, and 54% in 18 through 21. There is about a 3 to 5 year lag between the authorized capital budgets, the appropriations, translating it into debt service. There are strict IRS rules that you're not allowed to borrow tax-free for longer than you need the money. And often, is Alan here? I work with Alan Lowe a lot on this. He's juggling different projects, different priorities. We need approvals. If we don't get the approval, that project moves back, another project moves up. So even though it's authorized, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to borrow it in the next year. Okay? The first year, especially for a school project, the first year we have to present it to Hartford, and then if it's approved, that first year we're probably spending no more than 10% just on design. And then after that, the next 2 or 3 years is when we have the heavy expenditures. So we may not start borrowing for 2 or 3 years. Then from a financial point of view, and this is especially true in the past, we might delay repaying principal for 1, 2, or 3 years as a project starts to make it a little bit easier for the operating budget. So that's why, even though we've started to have these authorizations, we don't see it translate into the debt service. But in the next 3, 4 years, that debt service will go up to the 70 to 80% range. My conclusion is the city, the council, the mayor have invested a great deal in the schools. 70% on the operating side, and now 70%, if not more, on the capital side. And the question is, how do we make sure that we have sufficient funding for all of the city programs and departments that we need. Questions? Let me
When,
move.
can I ask, when has it ever been that high for
Which one?
the operating and the capital with the Board of Ed?
I don't know. I haven't looked beyond the 6 or 7 years. I mean, the mayor's been here for many years. I don't know whether in a, financial capacity, except as a department head asking for more money. But my sense is, just my gut, is that there was an underinvestment at a certain point. And then remember that 12 years ago we had a terrible recession, so we're going to be cutting back on everything. Dr. Adamowski is here, a commitment is made. When you hire someone who has a program and a vision, you give them the tools. You give them people, you give them budget, and you say, do what you have to do, okay? And so my sense is that the city said we need to invest in our students. Operating, capital for new or improved school facilities. So I'm not sure what happened in the past, but all I could say is I'm sitting here, I'm the financial steward. I'm trying to protect the city financially, both today, operationally, but also with an eye to the future, okay? I'll make this analogy. Connecticut, similar to other states, California, Illinois, promises were made. Pensions, health benefits, other things, way up here. The funding for those future commitments was below what should have been. And you end up having a big gap and a liability. So how do you have to pay back people. We're not Detroit or Puerto Rico defaulting on our debt. Well, then what happens is in your operating budget, you crowd out your current expenses with debt service. And so the operating expenditures in the departments are starving. They say, we need some money, but we got to pay our debt holders. That's why Argentina repudiates its loans every 5 to 10 years. But what happens is now people are reluctant to lend them the next time. So our credit rating is very valuable and precious. We have to make sure that we can repay those loans within a debt service agreement, our operating budget. At the same time, I have an eye on the AAA bond rating. I am fortunate. I came in here with a AAA bond rating. The markets were kind. We refinanced at 2.5% for 20 years. We had a $50 million issue 30 years out at 3.5%. That will help. If I borrow money, there's another financial principle about matching the life of the assets with the life of the debt. When I came here, we borrowed for 15 years. Very conservative. But if we're building a school that's going to last 50 years, then we're asking the current taxpayers for 15 years to pay and benefit future beneficiaries. It's not fair. It's an extra burden. So what I said, and I worked it out with the mayor, with our financial advisor, so when we borrow, let me put it into two big buckets. The schools are 40 to 50 years. Everything else is pretty current, 10 to 20 years. So for the schools, we borrow a 30-year term, which is standard in the industry. And for the others, shorter term, 15. So we'll stretch it out in a prudent way so that we have more room in the operating budget for everything else. But that's why when I presented the capital budget, I said, we have a real limit of how much we can borrow. So that's the missing link here, the capital and the debt service. Okay, let's press on. I know. Oh, I'm sorry.
Real quick, mentioning that threshold, right? Do we have a sense of where we're at?
Yes.
As far as
We are
propensity to reaching?
We are at about, I think it's 258 million of debt. Financial advisor and I looked at all the Connecticut credits that are AAA and AA and looking where the line is drawn. Stanford is now AA, others are AAA. We looked at the statistics. We concluded that it will be very hard for us to maintain a AAA rating with more than 400 million in debt. And I use that limit, as my mother would say, don't spend it all at once, to increase the debt over the next 10 years if we need to get to that limit. That's part of the plan.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Next. Let's talk about economics a little bit. So, economics is about making choices and trade-offs. It's about setting priorities and making decisions, knowing there are not enough resources to obtain everything you wish. I guess my joke this season is, unless you're Michael Bloomberg, no one has unlimited resources. How do we decide to allocate resources wisely between competing good choices? Okay? Each department head prioritizes within their department their requests. We in the city, the mayor and I, start looking about how we can allocate between departments. It could be that priority number 2 and 3 in this department is more important than number 1 in that department. And then we go with city versus the schools. It's not easy. It's very tough, worthy choices. But so we must allocate across all departments, all priorities, both short-term, operating, and long-term for capital projects. So that's what we're trying to do. There's a lot going on under the surface, and we're trying to accommodate everyone as best we can. Law of diminishing returns. As we increase our spending or investment, for each additional expenditure, the amount of benefit return we get becomes smaller and smaller. Let me go back to what I'll call the pre-Dr. Adamowski years. If we had been underinvested and our amount of allocated resources to the schools was relatively low, then when we pour in 50, 60, 70% of our resources, we're going to get a very good return. We're starting with a low base. He has all the great ideas of how to utilize them. But as you go out after a number of years, the same $1 million gives you less of a return. He's gotten the best returns on the best things, the easiest things, and it takes more to achieve a similar return. So, sorry. I would say we have to be careful as we move forward. I've shown that the public schools has received about 70% of the total city's expenditures for the last 5 to 6 years. Given the law of diminishing returns, we must be mindful of all the other areas of the city operations which merit investment. Roads, parks and rec, mitigation and prevention of flooding, community services, human services, economic development, transportation, parking and mobility, youth programs, libraries, buildings, police, fire. We got to cover it all, okay? And so the question is, how do you allocate? It's an art, not a science. I'm just concerned with such an overinvestment in the schools historically that we make sure that this year and going forward, we make sure that the city side is getting a share that will maintain the quality services for the city. Okay, let's go on. I know I have a time limit. Okay? Questions? Okay. So now we're on slide 8. I call this section Challenges in Establishing Budgets for the Norwalk Public Schools. I am not from Connecticut, and I learned certain things about the structural system here with public schools. Connecticut state law prohibits a city government like us from reducing a school budget below the prior year total. As you noticed, on a total funding basis, the first 3 years of Mayor Rilling's tenure, we lowered our costs. The school budget goes up every single year without exception. I talked to Alan Lowe about construction costs. We were in a meeting and they said, when a project is delayed, the costs go up 2, 3%, maybe 4%. I said, every year? They said, yes. I said, there was a recession, 2008, 2009. Did the costs go down? Nope. They go up every year. Okay? So that's a problem because in the real world, in corporate America, things go up and down all the time. You question expenses. And so that's a handicap and it's a hard way for us to determine a budget. Secondly, The mayor, the Board of Estimate Taxation, and you are only allowed to establish an upper limit ceiling on public school expenditures. The public school sets their priorities, and they allocate resources, and they're only subject to the Board of Ed approval. We only get a top line. You know, it's like my child saying, could I have $10 allowance? What are you spending it on? Whatever I want. It's a very uncomfortable feeling. Okay? Let's go on. Then I'm going to talk about local issues that create some challenges for us. So I have found the public schools present information in confusing ways that are sometimes misleading. Let me talk about the reports that they requested a 7% increase in their budget. I've been an accountant for many years. Part of the reason we have accounting is because there are so many activities going on at the same time. You're purchasing materials, you're hiring, they work but they didn't get paid yet. We have a receivable, we got the goods but we didn't pay them yet. Accountants draw a line in the sand, that's your financial statement period. And at that point in time, you determine what are your assets, what are your liabilities, what's your fund balance. Looking back, you say, what were my revenues, what were my expenditures, what's my surplus or deficit? Looking forward, you say, what's my projected revenues, what's my projected expenditures, and what's my projected surplus or deficit? June 30th is our year end. June 30th of 2019, the budget for the Board of Ed was $198.5 million, period, full stop. This year they requested $216.3 million. The simple math says that's an increase of $17.8 million. And if I divide that by the base of 198.5, that's just a couple of decimals away from 9%. Here's what happened. During the year, we paid them $1 million for that special appropriation for English language learners. And we also gave them $3 million in rollovers from last year's budget that wasn't spent. The reason that $4 million is important, I'll go back to the state rule. I am not allowed to give them less than they've gotten before. Okay? Once the dollar's in, it starts compounding. So we gave them $4 million. So the minimum for this year's projected 21 budget, it could be no lower than $202 million. It doesn't affect the base. The approved budget was not 198. But here's what they did. They took the $17.8 million increase and reduced it by the $4 million because they already had it in their pocket. So they called that $13.8 million. And the 198.5, they increased that because they said, oh, we already get that. So now you have a smaller numerator, 13.8, over a larger denominator, 202, and you get to 6.81%, that's 7%. The 7% increase claim is misleading, designed to reduce the perception of the size of this year's increase. Let me just talk about the math. Let's assume I agreed with them with the $4 million. Shouldn't they go back to last year's number and say, yes, the 198 was a 4% increase, but because it really now is 202, it's a 6.6% increase. You know how the government federally restates statistics? I only heard them say 7% raise, never heard them say, let's change the past number. I don't appreciate that, and I think we have consistent statistics. The increase they asked for was 9% or $18 million, which is an enormous amount. Okay? Next. As I've shown, the public school ignores in-kind services. They don't mention it when they talk about what they spend or what they're asking for. They ignore their share of debt service. They ignore revenue from state grants. It understates total spending, it understates expenditures per pupil, and it reduces the percentage of total city financial resources spent on Norwalk Public Schools. Look, this stuff gets a little complicated. It's hard for people to understand. We have an attention deficit society. We're lucky if people read and remember the headlines. They put information out that can be misunderstood. And we have to do a better job to say, here's what's really going on. Next slide. Slide 11. When they look at budget requests, they're always in the form of increases to the prior year budget. And they're always grouped by goals, okay? Tom Hamilton, the school CFO, sat with me to review his budget request, and he had a line item for personnel, and it was going up by 9%. I said, wow, I would think they could negotiate a better union contract than that, and they did. They negotiated 2.3%. Had it go up 9%. They have 23 new full-time equivalent positions. And I always say, a new government position lasts forever. It's 30 years now, and then whatever we contribute toward retirement. That's very expensive. The mayor mandated, I'll fill vacancies, but it's going to be a very long day before I create a new position because he knows how expensive it is. So they took the 23 new positions and buried it in that line item. And I only found it because I was asking about the 9% increase. My next point, the union contract was 2.3. It's almost impossible to determine headcount. I said, could I please have a list, title by title, of every new position? What's the title? What's the salary? What's the benefits? What's the total cost? Because normally I do benefits as a percentage of base salary. They said, no, we do $20,000 a head. Okay, whatever works for you. Just show me the numbers. I'm still waiting for that schedule. They have an analysis this way, an analysis this way. They do it this way. I was a research analyst on Wall Street. I'll give you the spreadsheet, you fill it out. Don't give me the 500-page book and say it's somewhere in there, you figure it out. I don't want to double count. I don't want to miss anyone. Show me the list of all the new people. Never got it. It avoids the scrutiny of prior year expenditures. Because of that state law, which I really don't like, I can never go back. So once they claw their way to 198, that 198 is golden. They don't have to explain it or anything. Dr. Adamowski is retiring. In fiscal year 20, our current year, the public schools have retained a search firm or consulting firm to help them hire a replacement. Well, they need that this year. I'm hoping they don't need it next year. Does it come out of the budget? I don't know. No one tells me. But once it's in, it never goes away. It's the gift that keeps on giving. So that's problematic to me. It also avoids non-recurring one-time expenditures like the search and prior year expenditures. I go back to the Jimmy Carter days where he called it zero-based budgeting. Every year you have to justify your numbers. We did it with our departments. We said, okay, we gave you a budget for 3 years, but you only spent so much. Why do you need that now? And the answer that was not acceptable was because we've always done it this way. No. Well, I got it last year. No. Why do you need it this coming year? We have so many competing requirements, we can only afford to allocate our resources to the most important pressing ones. Well, if you can't look back at what you've done, maybe you had an experiment. It didn't work. Let's cut it out. Maybe they're doing that, maybe they're not. I can't see it, and they don't respond. Okay? Next slide, number 12. The public school refused to formally request the Norwalk High School construction project as part of their fiscal year 2021 capital program. They wanted it to be seen as the mayor's request only. However, they were side by side with us in all the meetings in Hartford and Norwalk. They stated they wanted the school. They said it to the mayor Friday. We want the school. Well, then why don't you own up to it and put it on your capital project? Well, there's some political heat currently. They want the mayor to take it, and they want to disassociate themselves from it. They're the ones who are going to benefit. Look, I'm all for buying a $225 million school when someone's paying me $175 for it. That's smart. Wouldn't do it if they don't want it. The disingenuousness was purely political, and it was for the mayor to take the heat on the project and to disassociate the public school from this project, and we just didn't appreciate that. Okay. Next, slide 13.
Mr. Dakowitz, I just want to make an announcement for anybody here for the 7:30 meeting. We're probably going to run over and start the 7:30 meeting a little bit later. So we just wanted to let you know that.
Thanks. So another topic about the public school budgets is we only learn of certain details when events do not go as planned or accidentally we learn of them. As I indicated before, they don't have to tell us any details. You good folks are only allowed to tell them, here's the limit. They get to spend their money any which way they want, only due to the oversight by the Board of Ed. They don't have to answer me. I say, I don't know your numbers. They say, sure you do. It's in your Munis accounting system. It's all there. I said, I'm not going to spend my time looking at Munis, trying to decipher what you have, and then if I come up with something that might be a cost savings, you're going to ignore me because you're legally allowed to ignore me. So that's part of the problem. But the glimpses we've seen of certain items cause us a grave concern. One was gift cards. They bought gift cards for teacher appreciation. Mayor, what's it called? On what day did they give them out?
A convocation.
Convocation Day. They give out a goodie bag. It had $10 gift cards. It had a T-shirt. Welcoming you back to school. We thank you for your services. $10 gift card. They use it for recruitment. We're going to recruit teachers by giving out gift cards. The gift cards they bought expired after 1 year. There's a law in Connecticut that if you buy gift cards, they cannot expire. So they obviously bought it from another state. It turns out that the gift cards they gave out at convocation expired a week later. So many of the teachers weren't even able to use it, and it was a waste. The $10 gift cards, they cost $15. They wanted to brand them as Norwalk Public Schools, so when they're recruiting, they could give it out and they tell people, here's Norwalk Public Schools. We're paying a 50% premium to give out gift cards. The reason we discovered this...
No, go ahead.
The reason we discovered this is that an individual employed by the schools came down to my tax collector and said, here are 10 gift cards I'd like to pay my tax bill. That was a yellow flag. We learned about it. We sat down with Tom Hamilton, the CFO. We found out these programs. And every time we find out something like this, we're told, oh, that was somebody's program. They're no longer with us, and it's all cleaned up. I said, do you have a record of everybody you gave the cards to? They said, sure. Well, you know, for recruiting, we don't know the names of everybody, but we did give it to every teacher. I said, I'd like to see a list. I haven't gotten that list. I said, are the cards secured? Are they locked up? Can someone just take them? We saw an employee take them. Oh, yeah, they're locked up, not a problem. We get assurances, we get words. I never know what's really going on.
In the interest of time, if we could jump to slide 18 and kind of wrap up, and then any questions that exist between slides, whatever, 13 and 18, we can kind of call your office or whatever.
Fair enough.
Thanks.
Thank you. Slide 18, let's look at the city operating expenditures. And you're seeing the changes. This is from the current approved 2020 and the recommended 2021. The public schools we've discussed, debt service we've discussed. Community service is a new department. It's going from 7.3 million to 9.1, an increase of 1.7 million or 23.8%. A lot of the money in community services is coming from the grants department. So that's why the grants that we issue and distribute went from 2.3 to 1.4, a reduction of $900,000. When you look at the net, the increase was only $800,000. And I'll point out, 400 of that 800,000 are social workers that we are paying the money for so that they can go to the homes of the English language learners who are coming to the schools, because the public school social workers have to treat children at school. Our social workers can treat the whole family at home. So this is one of those in-kind services. We look at contingency. It went up by 1.7 million. The reason for that is we are in a union negotiation year. So we took all the raises that are normally, the raises and the step increases that are normally in each department, and we put them all into one line item. So that's why they're there. Next slide. So when we do our calculation to calculate the mill rates, we start with those department budgets and then we go to tax adjustments. Tax adjustments were down from 1.9 to 1.6. The reserve for uncollected went up slightly, but that's because it's the same, we expect the same 98.6% excellent collection rate, but it's on a larger total, and that's why the reserve has gone up. Other tax revenue, I've mentioned that before. What we found historically is we always ran a surplus, so maybe the budget number can be increased, and we feel confident that we can get this number. Interdepartmental is from the state. It's going up to 19.4, and it's primarily ECS. Now, before you turn the page, on the last line on the upper left series is highlighted in yellow, and that's a drawdown of the fund balance. So we planned this year to draw down $6 million, and next year to draw down $8 million. Please turn to the next slide. I'll explain it in a little bit more detail. The unassigned unrestricted fund balance is often known as a rainy day fund. It's a CFO's dream. We like to have a buffer for bad events that are unanticipated. So we were moving along from 42 million up to 51 million, and in 2018 we went to 57.7. The calculation is, what is the unassigned unrestricted fund balance in relation to your budget, your total expenditures? The city policy is that we maintain a fund balance between 7.5% and 15%. So when we got to 16.5%, the mayor decided, let's lessen the burden on taxpayers for taxes, and let's draw down $6 million from the fund to offset some of the tax increase. The problem with fiscal year 19 is we managed very well. Not only didn't we need to dip into the reserve, we generated an additional $6 million of surplus. That's not something to be upset about. That's a good thing, but it increased our balance to 69.7 million. So we're at 20%. So the concept is, for this year, we were going to draw down the fund balance $6 million. That's in our budget. Our plan for the recommended next year budget is to draw it down by $8 million. And as you see, after those 2 years, we would drop down again under 15%. Bottom line, it's very important for the rating agencies. They love to see that, because it says not only do you have a balance to cushion the unexpected, it says you're living within your means on a regular basis. So that's very important when they look at our AAA rating. The next page. Yes.
But that's a formula we can't continue to go down. A road we cannot continue to go down.
Right.
Right, no. We're just doing it to get down to the 15%. It was just, the city policy is 7.5% to 15%. So when you're above the 15%, what do you do with the funds? On the next slide, I say this is what I prefer to do. It's for unanticipated one-time disasters. Economic, if we had the loss of a major employer, we're going to have operational expenses. We may have taxes that go down. We may have extra expenses. Physical, if you have a hurricane. Jefferson School burned down one day. Okay, we're going to have additional expenses. So you have the rainy day fund for those unanticipated one-time expenditures. At the same time, we have long-term liabilities. They're called pensions and OPEB, other post-employment benefits, primarily health insurance. Now, I will tell you, as a municipality, we're doing much better than many other governments. Our pension plan is funded in excess. We have multiple pension plans, but they're over 80% funded. And our OPEB is funded over 50%. I will tell you, I have seen numerous where the pensions are between 30 and 50%, and the OPEB is at 0. So, again, the rating agencies look at that. They love it. My feeling is, if you have extra fund balance, pay down that debt. We owe it to them, and we have all these demands on our money. When we have a good year, let's put it away there. The mayor's intent was to just make a little bit better for the citizens the past 2 years, but once we go down below the 15%, I would advocate that we have to have revenues currently to pay for our current expenditures, and if we have fund balance extra or a surplus, we can use that to pay down the long-term liabilities. Okay? The next, the recommended 21 budget translates into a tax levy. It's gone from 290 million to 344 million. We had some decreases, but it's a translation of what we're spending, okay? On the city side, we've been spending 1% to 2%, and the public schools are spending 4%, so this is somewhere in between, 2.5% to 3%. The next page shows how the tax levy translates into mill rates. The salmon color in the top would be our current year that's been approved, and those are the mill rates by district. The blue in the middle are next year's recommended budget, and those are the mill rates by district. We then calculate using median home values, and we have down below what the average tax bill would be. So I think 4th District is what we've often used as an object of an average. So the average bill would go from $6,438 to $6,683 under this year's recommended budget. The increase is $245 or 3.8%. In summarizing quickly, we believe this is balanced. Fair, I'm going to say it's getting more fair with fiscal restraint and affordable for Norwalk single-family owners. Thank you, and I'll answer whatever questions we have time for.
We had to skip page slide 14, but it looks like there's some intriguing items on that. Can you just walk us through that real quick?
Yeah.
What we found out when we talked about the gift cards is that they were used for recruiting sessions. I said, how so? And they said they went on recruiting trips to recruit minority teachers. So they went to Puerto Rico, they went to Detroit, and they went to Las Vegas. Now, I lived in Detroit, and I don't know how many people are saying, oh boy, I can't wait to move to Connecticut to teach there. I question the whole concept, and on the bottom, okay, fine, it was an idea. How successful was it? How many teachers did we end up recruiting after we did this trip? And by the way, who attended? How many? And what was the cost? You know, cost, benefit. If it cost us, I don't know, pick a number, $10,000, and we recruited 10 minority teachers, maybe we would say, that's great. But if it cost us $100,000 and we had no minority recruitment because of it, got a problem. Again, impenetrable, we don't know the details, we just knew that these trips were taken.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Dakowitz, and I would accept a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Thank you. The special session is adjourned.
Thank you.
So Mayor, can I just say something? I just want to thank you for this detailed report. It was a real lesson for me, and some really good information for us as we move forward on making this decision. So
You're welcome.
I appreciate this and your staff.
Quite welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we want to take a 2-minute break, if anybody needs a 2-minute break, please rise again for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Something's unplugged here. Maybe that's a problem. Pardon me? Okay, so clerk, if you'll please call the roll and read the prepared statement.
February 11, 2020. Please be advised this meeting is being taped for audio and video broadcast. The meeting will also be closed captioned. It is important that everyone speak clearly into the microphones. Only one person speak at a time. Assisted listening devices are available. Mr. Burnett.
Present.
Ms. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Langella.
Present.
Mr. Sachinelli.
Present.
Ms. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Houlihan,
Here.
Mr. Roberts,
Present.
Mr. Nas, Ms. Young,
Here.
Mr. Kides, Mr. Theodorides,
Here.
Mr. Keegan, Mr. Serenides,
Here.
Mr. Livingston,
Here.
Ms. Shanahan,
Here.
13 present, we have a quorum.
13 present. First item on the agenda, acceptance of the minutes of the regular meeting of January 28th, 2020. Do I have a motion?
I'll move that.
Moved by Ms. Smith.
I have a,
Any corrections, deletions?
yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Johnson?
Under the Public Works, or Public Safety Committee, rather, it should say install one new street light on the existing utility pole.
What page
This
is
is on,
it,
I'm
please?
sorry, page 4.
Page 4.
Section 3217, representation of respondents by city, health and public safety below.
Okay.
Instead of one new street?
Yes, one new, we are not going to, yeah, street light.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other corrections?
Mayor, I've got 3 corrections as well.
Ms. Shanahan?
On the page 2, in the paragraph under Lisa Britton, the next one, it says John Flynn. Second line, he said nothing was done, not Cone. On the next paragraph, the last line, it said it was fine with him. And on the last paragraph, I think, Harvard residents, when they approve.
Okay. Any further corrections, deletions, omissions? Seeing none, all in favor of the minutes as amended, corrected? All opposed? Abstentions? Mr. Roberts abstains. Okay. Next item on the agenda is public participation, I believe.
No.
No one signed. Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to address the council? Seeing none, we will close public participation. There are no resignations and appointments on the agenda, so we'll move on to Mayor's remarks. As you know, we just saw what I consider to be a very thorough and detailed presentation on the budget. And I just want to let the council know that, we have an obligation ahead of us coming up. This is a very challenging budget year. It was very difficult because we always know that we want to try to keep our tax base and our tax levy as low as possible. We know that living in Connecticut is a challenge when we have to rely on property taxes so heavily. It's a very regressive form of taxation, and we need to do everything we can to make sure we don't force people out of our beautiful city. This past weekend, and I want to give more credit to Mr. Dakowitz and his team and my team, and Mr. Burnett and others, and Mr. Camacho, we spent Saturday morning going over the budget where in addition to the cuts already made by Mr. Dakowitz, we cut the city side of the operating budget another $2.2 million, including 8 positions that were requested but were not justified. As you know, I said that if I told people no new positions, and if you absolutely need a new position, then you're going to have to justify it in writing. And I got justifications, and they were all good, well thought out justifications, but it wasn't anything that was, I can't do the job, I can't run my department without these positions. It was always things that eventually we're going to be doing, but perhaps this year with the significant increase in tax levy, which is the biggest that we've had, it's just not the year to do that. So we really took out a sharpened pencil and cut a lot out of the city side of the budget, and we worked very hard. And on Sunday, I believe Mr. Dakowitz and his team were in the office as well, finalizing things. It's a challenge, but it's something that is an obligation. Nobody likes to levy taxes. That's the worst job. When I go to the schools and the young kids ask me, what's the best thing you like about being mayor? I said, coming into the schools and visiting with our children. What's the thing you like the least? And I said, having to tax your parents and to increase their taxes on their homes. And it's not a pleasant situation, but we do have to do it. And again, we put together what we believe to be a fair, balanced budget that will provide the city services that we need, but also keeping our tax levy as low as we possibly can. So I want to thank you all for your attention. Again, I want to thank Mr. Dakowitz. I want to thank his team who was here earlier, Chitsame Lamb, Lola, and Simone. And Angela. She's still here. No, she's gone too. And Angela. They put a lot of time and energy in, and the department heads for living within their means. They generally do live within their means. They recognize that they have a budget, they have an allocation, and so we end up asking them to live within that budget, and for the most part, on a regular basis, I've been very pleased with the response. So thank you again. My next comment, President's Day is Monday, February 17th. City Hall will be closed. The Norwalk Public Library will be closed on Sunday and Monday. Garbage and recycling services will follow a regular collection schedule, and the transfer station will be open. The yard debris site at 15 South Smith Street will be closed. So any reporters in the audience, please put that in your local paper or site. Earlier today, Paulie's Deli and Bagels was recognized for its top lighthouse rating from the Norwalk Health Department. We were pleased to be there to present them with their 11th certificate in 12 years. In total, 267 restaurants and food establishments received a top lighthouse rating from the Health Department this year. All received certificates. Last year, 49% of the eligible restaurants in Norwalk received an award. This year, 58% of eligible restaurants received the award, which is the highest percentage of awards that the Norwalk Health Department has awarded to our establishments. And I believe they have to receive a rating of over 90%. We inspect all the restaurants and food establishments in the city of Norwalk each year. This year, no, it's not this year. This Friday, February 14th, is Valentine's Day. The Norwalk Health Department will be offering free HIV and hepatitis C testing from 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., no appointment necessary. Also a reminder that Census 2020 is rapidly approaching. Great part-time job opportunities available in Norwalk that pay $25 an hour. Go to 2020census.gov for more information, and please complete the census in March. We all know how important it is, especially for cities like Norwalk, to get a complete count. And if we don't count everybody or count as many people as we possibly can, that means there's going to be perhaps a decrease in the amount of federal funding that we get for this area. So, and also it impacts our legislature in DC. Tuesday, February 18th, from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., there will be special event signing for people who need to have special events signed. We do that as a convenience mechanism for people, because sometimes when you want a permit for a road race or something, you have to run to the police department, the fire department, the health department, and all these other things. And you want to make sure that you get it all done, and it's very inconvenient sometimes for somebody to have to go to all those places, especially when they go and the person that needs to sign off on the permit might not be there. Pardon me? No road races. Okay, so road races, processions, and walks require different procedures, cannot be processed at this signing. This is for like carnivals and those kinds of things on city property. So it is February 18th from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. And that is it. And I will turn the floor over to our Madam President, Ms. Smith.
Been hearing a lot of that, Madam President. Thank you, Mayor. I, too, would just like to thank Mr. Dakowitz for such a clear, clean, concise presentation. That you are a professor at NYU, right? Yes, is very clear to me. Because what you did for us is you scaffolded, what we teachers call scaffolding, and you just set it up so you built upon everything we needed to know. So it was really very helpful, and thank you for that, because it helps us make the best decisions that we can for our citizens. So I really appreciate that. In terms of our council business tonight, we have an executive session that, unless anyone has any objection, I'd like to move to the end. And tonight's consent calendar will be read by Mr. Keegan.
You have an easy job tonight, Mr. Keegan.
This one will
What'd you say? We vote on that?
Public Works Committee. A1, authorize the mayor, Harry W. Rilling, to execute an amendment with Deering Construction Incorporated for project PM 2019-1 pavement management program for a sum not to exceed $3,750,000, accounts noted. A2, authorize the mayor, Harry W. Grilling, to execute amendments 1 and 2 with Van Ass Engen Brusselin Incorporated, dated November 14, 2018, for traffic consulting services related to Walk Bridge Program for a total sum not to exceed $40,000, account noted. B, land use and building management. B1, authorize the purchasing agent to issue a purchase order to Construction Solutions Group, LLC, to prepare a school building construction standard manual for an amount not to exceed $24,564, account noted.
Thank you, Mr. Keegan, for that incredible consent calendar. Unless there are any questions, comments, I'll call for a vote. All in favor of the consent calendar as read? Unanimous.
Thank you. Now, the next item on the agenda is an executive session for the purpose of a presentation of the cybersecurity assessment conducted by the city and the Board of Education. Do I have a motion to go into executive session? So moved. Okay, Ms. Shanahan moves. All in favor? Opposed? Extensions. We are in executive session at 8:04 p.m. Thank you. We will invite Mr. Dakowitz to. Okay, we're on. We're out of executive session at 9:03. During executive session, no motions were made, no votes were taken. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. We'll give it to Ms. Young this time. Ms. Young makes a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? We are adjourned at 9:04. Thank you all.